The luxurious charity gala in New York was in full swing. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and opulent decorations. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled, their jewelry catching the light as they moved. The air buzzed with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. James, a 28-year-old African-American waiter, navigated the crowd with a tray of drinks. His crisp white shirt and black bow tie contrasted sharply with the extravagant attire of the guests. As he offered champagne flutes to passing socialites, he couldn't help but feel out of place. The weight of the disparity between his world and theirs pressed down on him. Victoria Ashcroft, a 45-year-old socialite known for her sharp tongue and influence in high society, made her entrance. Heads turned as she glided into the room, her designer gown trailing behind her. A small entourage of equally well-dressed friends followed in her wake. Victoria's eyes scanned the room, a slight sneer on her perfectly made-up face. As James approached Victoria's group with his tray, he overheard her making cutting remarks about the staff. "Can you believe the help they've hired this year?" Victoria said loudly, not bothering to lower her voice. "It's like they're trying to make a statement. I preferred when things were more traditional." Her friends laughed sycophantically, their eyes darting nervously to the waitstaff around them. James felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but he maintained his professional demeanor. He had encountered this type of behavior before, but it never got easier. Victoria, emboldened by her friend's reaction, decided to take her comments further. As James offered her a glass of champagne, she looked him up and down with disdain. "Well, aren't you a sight?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I suppose they'll let anyone in here these days. Tell me, do you even know which fork to use for the salad?" The group around Victoria erupted in laughter. James stood frozen, a tray trembling slightly in his hands. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, but he knew it could cost him his job. Instead, he forced a polite smile and moved on to the next group of guests, Victoria's cruel laughter echoing behind him. The incident with Victoria left James shaken, but he had no time to dwell on it. The gala was in full swing, and he had a job to do. As he continued serving drinks, he noticed a stir among the guests. The host of the evening, reclusive billionaire Charles Harrington, was making his way to the stage. Charles Harrington, a man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, commanded attention as he took the microphone. The room fell silent, all eyes on a man who rarely made public appearances. Victoria, still basking in the aftermath of her cruel joke, positioned herself near the front, eager to see what announcements would be made. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his voice deep and authoritative. "I appreciate your presence at this year's charity gala. However, tonight is about more than just raising funds. It's about revealing truths and challenging our preconceptions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria leaned in, anticipating some juicy gossip or scandalous revelation. She had no idea how right she was or how it would impact her. Charles continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "For years, I've observed the behavior of our social elite from afar. Tonight, I decided to see it up close. That's why I asked my son to work this event as a waiter." The room fell, deadly silent. Victoria's smug smile froze on her face as a sense of dread crept over her. "James," Charles called out, "please join me on stage." All heads turned as James, still holding his serving tray, made his way through the shocked crowd. He ascended the stage, standing tall next to Charles. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet James Harrington, my son and the new director of the Harrington Foundation." The silence shattered as gasps and whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. Victoria stood rooted to the spot, her face drained of color. She watched in horror as James, the man she had so cruelly mocked just moments ago, took the microphone. "Thank you, Father," James said, his voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside him. "I'm honored to take on this role and to finally reveal my true identity." As James began to share his story, Victoria felt the eyes of the entire room turn to her. Her moment of arrogance had become her downfall, and there was nowhere to hide. Victoria's world crumbled around her as James continued to speak. She tried to maintain her composure, but the shock of the revelation left her visibly shaken. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking allies, but found only accusing stares and whispered conversations. "As many of you witnessed tonight," James said, his voice strong and clear, "prejudice and discrimination are still very much alive in our society. Even in this room, among the so-called elite, we've seen how quickly someone can be judged based on their appearance or perceived status. Victoria felt the weight of his words. She tried to interject, to explain herself, but her voice faltered. I didn't mean... She stammered, but no one was listening. The crowd that had laughed with her earlier now turned their backs, distancing themselves from her toxic presence. James continued, "My experience tonight has only strengthened my resolve to use this foundation to promote equality and challenge the systemic biases that plague our society." As he spoke, Victoria noticed her circle of friends dispersing. Amanda, her closest confidant, caught her eye briefly before turning away, a mix of disgust and disappointment on her face. One by one, Victoria's social circle abandoned her, leaving her isolated in a sea of judging faces. Lisa Reynolds, a former friend who had distanced herself from Victoria's cruel antics years ago, watched the scene unfold with a critical eye. She felt a sense of vindication seeing Victoria's true nature exposed. Lisa had always known that Victoria's arrogance would be her downfall, and now she was witnessing it firsthand. Desperate to salvage her reputation, Victoria attempted to approach the stage. "James, please, let me explain. It was just a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice shrill with panic. But her words fell on deaf ears. The crowd, energized by James's speech, drowned out her pleas with applause. Victoria found herself pushed to the periphery of the room, her designer gown and expensive jewelry now feeling like a garish costume. As James concluded his speech, outlining his vision for a more inclusive future, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall from grace. The society she had once ruled with sharp words and cruel jabs had turned against her. In one night, she had gone from being the queen of the social scene to a pariah, all because of her own arrogance and prejudice. The gala continued, but for Victoria, the party was over. She stood alone, watching as James, now the center of attention, was surrounded by well-wishers and potential allies. Her empire of influence had crumbled, and she was left to face the consequences of her actions. As the gala continued, Victoria found herself in an unfamiliar position, alone and unwanted. She tried to mingle, to salvage what was left of her social standing, but everywhere she turned, she was met with cold shoulders and averted gazes. Charles Harrington, the billionaire host and James's father, approached Victoria with a stern expression. His presence silenced the nearby guests, all eager to witness the confrontation. "Mrs. Ashcroft," Charles said, his voice low but firm, "I believe it's time for you to leave. Your behavior tonight has been unacceptable, and frankly, you're no longer welcome at any of our events." Victoria's face paled. "But Charles, surely you understand. It was just a misunderstanding. I've been a part of this circle for years," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Charles remained unmoved. "That's precisely the problem, Victoria. You've been a part of this for too long, perpetuating harmful attitudes. It ends now." As Victoria stood shell-shocked, a young woman approached. Zoe Chin, a 25-year-old activist known for her outspoken stance on social issues, had witnessed the entire scene unfold. "Mrs. Ashcroft," Zoe said, her voice clear and confident, "your actions tonight are a perfect example of the systemic racism and classism we're fighting against. You've shown everyone here exactly why change is necessary." Victoria, desperate to defend herself, turned to Zoe. "You don't understand. This isn't who I am. I support many charities, Zoe cut her off. "Writing checks doesn't excuse bigotry, Mrs. Ashcroft. Your true colors have been revealed, and now you must face the consequences." A small crowd had gathered around them, many nodding in agreement with Zoe's words. Victoria looked around frantically, hoping to find a friendly face, but found none. Her former friends watched from a distance, unwilling to associate themselves with her. As security discreetly approached to escort Victoria out, she realized the full extent of her isolation. The social world she had dominated for so long had turned its back on her. Her cruel words, once laughed off as witty remarks, now marked her as a pariah. Victoria was led to the exit, her head bowed in shame. As the doors closed behind her, she heard the gala resume, the laughter and chatter a stark reminder of the world she was now shut out from. Standing alone on the sidewalk, Victoria faced the harsh reality of her new, isolated existence. As Victoria was escorted out, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. James, now the center of attention, found himself surrounded by curious and supportive guests. The revelation of his true identity had transformed him from an invisible server to the most intriguing person in the room. James stood tall, his posture reflecting his newfound confidence. He engaged with the guests, discussing his vision for the Harrington Foundation and his plans to use his position to effect real change. I want to create opportunities for those who have been systematically excluded, James explained to a group of attentive listeners. Education, job training, community development. These are the areas where we can make a tangible difference. As he spoke, Lisa Reynolds, Victoria's former friend, approached James. Unlike the others who seemed merely curious or opportunistic, Lisa's eyes held genuine interest and compassion. "James," Lisa said, extending her hand, "I'm Lisa Reynolds. I was deeply moved by your speech and your story. I'd love to discuss how I can support your initiatives." James shook her hand warmly. "Thank you, Lisa. I'm always eager to collaborate with people who share our vision." Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "I've been working on a project to provide mentorship and internship opportunities for underprivileged youth. I think it could align perfectly with your goals for the foundation." As James and Lisa delved into a discussion about potential collaborations, other influential guests gathered around them. Among them was Marcus Chen, a tech mogul known for his philanthropic efforts. "James," Marcus interjected, "I'm impressed by your resilience and vision. My company would be interested in partnering with the Harrington Foundation to create a scholarship program for minority students in STEM fields." The conversation continued to evolve, with more guests offering support, resources, and partnerships. James found himself at the center of a network forming right before his eyes, a stark contrast to his position at the beginning of the evening. As the night progressed, James and Lisa began outlining plans for a comprehensive program that would address educational disparities and create pathways to meaningful employment. The energy in a room was palpable, with a sense of purpose replacing the earlier superficial socializing. By the end of the gala, James had secured commitments for several major initiatives. He stood with his father, Charles, both men beaming with pride and hope for the future. The night that began with humiliation had transformed into a launching pad for real, systemic change. In the days following the gala, James hit the ground running. With Lisa's help and the support of his new allies, he began organizing a fundraising campaign that quickly gained traction on social media. The contrast between James's humble beginnings and his newfound position resonated with people, making his story go viral. James and Lisa set up headquarters in a modest office space, deliberately choosing a location in a diverse neighborhood rather than a sleek downtown high-rise. They worked tirelessly, drafting proposals, meeting with community leaders, and fine-tuning their strategies. "We need to ensure that our initiatives have a real, lasting impact," James said during a team meeting. "It's not just about throwing money at problems. We need to address the root causes of inequality." Their first major project, a comprehensive education and job training program, was launched within weeks. It offered scholarships, mentorship, and internship placements to students from underprivileged backgrounds. The response was overwhelming, with applications pouring in from across the city. Meanwhile, Victoria observed James's rising popularity from the sidelines. Holed up in her luxurious apartment, she scrolled through social media, watching as James became the darling of both traditional and new media. Her own accounts were flooded with criticism and mockery, her fall from grace now a cautionary tale shared widely online. Victoria attempted to salvage her reputation by posting apologies and promises to do better, but her efforts fell flat. Each post was met with skepticism and further ridicule. She watched helplessly as her follower count dwindled while James's soared. James, on the other hand, was in high demand. He appeared on talk shows, gave interviews to major publications, and was invited to speak at conferences. In each appearance, he spoke candidly about his experiences and the importance of creating a more inclusive society. "My story is not unique," James said during a particularly impactful interview. "There are countless talented, hardworking individuals who are overlooked or underestimated because of their background or the color of their skin. Our goal is to change that narrative." As James's influence grew, so did the scope of his initiatives. What started as a local program began to expand nationally, with other cities reaching out to replicate their model. The Harrington Foundation was quickly becoming a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change. Weeks after the gala incident, Victoria found herself alone in her sprawling penthouse apartment. The space, once a testament to her social status, now felt cavernous and empty. Designer furniture and priceless art pieces surrounded her, but they offered no comfort. Victoria sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection. The face looking back at her was impeccably made up, but her eyes betrayed a deep sense of loss and confusion. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contact list. Name after name, she hesitated, then moved on. Each person represented a burned bridge, a friendship destroyed by her own arrogance. She dialed the number, her hand shaking slightly. Amanda? It's Victoria. I was hoping we could talk. The line went dead. Amanda had hung up without a word. Victoria tried again with another former friend, only to be sent straight to voicemail. Rising from her seat, Victoria wandered through her apartment. She passed by framed photos of glamorous parties and exotic vacations, each image a reminder of a life that no longer existed. She paused at a particularly large photo of herself at last year's Met Gala, surrounded by celebrities and influential figures. Now, those same people wouldn't even acknowledge her existence. Victoria's phone buzzed with a news alert. Another article about James Harrington and his latest philanthropic initiative. She read it, a mix of envy and regret washing over her. The man she had so callously dismissed was now changing lives, while she was trapped in a prison of her own making. For the first time in her life, Victoria was forced to confront her own insecurities. Why had she felt the need to put others down? What void had she been trying to fill with her cruel behavior? The questions swirled in her mind, uncomfortable but unavoidable. She walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. The New York skyline, once a backdrop to her social conquests, now seemed to mock her isolation. Victoria realized that her entire identity had been built on the fragile foundation of social status and material wealth. Without it, who was she? As night fell, Victoria remained by the window, alone with her thoughts. The realization that her actions had consequences, real, lasting consequences, was beginning to sink in. For the first time, she wondered if it was too late to change, to make amends, to find a purpose beyond social climbing and petty cruelty. James and Lisa's efforts were gaining momentum. Their initial success had inspired them to organize a large-scale fundraising event, aimed at drawing even more attention to their cause. The event, titled Voices of Change, was set to take place at a community center in one of the city's underserved neighborhoods. As the day of the event arrived, the community center buzzed with activity. Volunteers, many of whom were beneficiaries of James's programs, worked tirelessly to set up stages, information booths, and refreshment areas. The air was charged with anticipation and hope. James stood at the center of it all, directing operations and greeting early arrivals. Remember, he told his team, today is about showcasing the potential in our communities and the change we can achieve together. As the event kicked off, local and national media swarmed the venue. Cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position as James took the stage to deliver his opening speech. Today, we're not just raising funds, James began, his voice strong and clear. We're raising awareness. We're raising expectations. And most importantly, we're raising up voices that have been silenced for too long. The crowd erupted in applause. Among them were many faces familiar to the New York elite. The same people who had once laughed at Victoria's cruel jokes were now cheering for James's vision of equality. From a distance, Victoria observed the scene. She had managed to get close to the event but was stopped at the entrance, her name now on a list of unwelcome individuals. She watched, a mix of envy and regret on her face, as the crowd inside grew larger and more enthusiastic. Back inside, Lisa took the stage to introduce a group of young speakers, all participants in their mentorship program. Each shared their stories of struggle and triumph, moving the audience to tears and inspiring generous donations. As the event progressed, a new generation of activists and philanthropists emerged. Young people from diverse backgrounds approached James and Lisa, eager to get involved and make a difference in their communities. By the end of the day, Voices of Change had not only exceeded its fundraising goals but had also sparked a movement. Social media was ablaze with clips from the event, spreading James's message far beyond New York City. As James and Lisa wrapped up the event, exhausted but exhilarated, they knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice and equality was far from over, but they had taken a significant step forward. In the weeks following the Voices of Change event, Victoria found herself increasingly desperate to regain her lost status. She had spent days strategizing, convinced that she could find a way to redeem herself in the eyes of society. Her plan? To attend James's next fundraising event and publicly apologize, hoping to paint herself as a changed woman. On the night of the event, Victoria arrived at the venue, dressed impeccably as always. However, her usual confidence was replaced by nervous energy. As she approached the entrance, a security guard stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashcroft, but you're not on the guest list," he said firmly. Victoria's face flushed with embarrassment. There must be some mistake. I'm Victoria Ashcroft. I've attended every major charity event in the city for the past decade. The guard remained unmoved. I'm aware of who you are, ma'am. That's precisely why you're not allowed in. Mr. Harrington's orders. As Victoria stood there, shocked and humiliated, she could hear the buzz of excitement from inside the venue. Through the doors, she caught a glimpse of James being interviewed by a national news network. We're not just changing lives, James was saying, his voice carried by the microphones. We're changing the system that has kept so many people down for so long. It's time to challenge the status quo and create real opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background. The interviewer nodded enthusiastically. And what's next for the Harrington Foundation, James? There are rumors of a nationwide expansion. James smiled, his eyes bright with determination. Those rumors are true. We're taking our programs national. We've seen the impact we can have in New York, and it's time to bring that change to communities across the country. Victoria listened, her heart sinking. She realized that while she had been plotting her comeback, James had been changing the world. The contrast between her self-centered schemes and his genuine desire to help others was stark. As security began to escort her away from the premises, Victoria caught one last glimpse of James through the window. He was surrounded by a diverse group of supporters, all hanging on his every word. In that moment, Victoria understood that her time had truly passed. The world had moved on, leaving her behind.